Hey everyone, and welcome back to our Let's Talk About It. Today we have a lady. We've never actually, I think, formally met, but we've known each other for years through social media. And I've always respected her just as a businesswoman, as a wife, mother, and even now grandma. I'm not sure you have the different term for it. But what I love the most about Candy is that she's always given really good information. And I'm a person that, as a businesswoman myself, obviously, I love family. I love to be able to have the balance of the two. And I love when I see people share both sides of themselves, because I think it just humanizes who we are. And on the other side of that too, I've heard absolutely amazing things about her when it comes to the areas that we're going to talk about today that people tend to shy away from: bookkeeping, accounting, things that as business owners, we need to know. It's not something we need to run from, something that we need to say, well, just throw it off down the end of the year time. I think when you start strong and you make good, strong financial decisions now, you can build something even better going forward. And so that's why I wanted her to come on today, because I've heard great things, and I'm really, really excited about having you today, Candy. Thank you for joining us.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Of course, of course. So tell me a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, I actually never intended to be a business owner. I worked retail from the time I was 17 until the time I actually had my second child. I'd been working almost 10 years, had worked my way up through the ranks, and then decided it didn't really make sense to work outside of the home with two children and childcare and all of that. So I was home for 3 years. And then I was asked to help out at a preschool where the director was out on medical leave and had been out before, came back, had to be out again. They were expecting it to be a pretty significant amount of time. And my kids were the perfect age at that time. They were, I think, 2.5 and 4.5. So they could come with me to the preschool. I did the work that needed to be done, and then I left. I didn't do it as an all-day thing. I just did it for what they needed, but it was a way for me to kind of get back into the workforce. And after that, I thought I should do something, instead of just being home, because I've always felt like the need to achieve something, and it's great being a mom and wife and everything too, but I wanted something else. So I worked for a publishing company for many years as the full charge bookkeeper. And then over time, someone knew what I did and said, could you please help me? My husband has a business, so that's kind of what started me on the road to entrepreneurship. She bugged me for a few months, really, until I gave in. And then I was like, well, if I'm going to do this legally, which I do everything legally, right? I have to have a business license. And at the time I had to have a home operating permit and, had to have software. And I thought it doesn't make sense to have one client only. I need to have a few more. And as they say, the rest is history, right? Now, I've been running my company. That was 2002 when the person said, please help. And so I've been helping entrepreneurs with, I say, things they generally have to do in their business and they don't want to, or they're terrified, to look at because they think they're going to do something wrong and they're going to get a notice from the IRS. So that's the business side. And as you mentioned, I'm a wife and a mom and a grandmother of two little grandbabies that bring me so much joy. So it's exciting.
Awesome. Well, tell me, let's start here. Why do you think people are really afraid? I know you mentioned about, just about the IRS side of it, but I'm sure there's other things too. Like, why do you think coming to you, I say coming to you, but, working with someone who has your background, it makes people scared?
So I think there's multiple reasons behind why people are afraid. I think one is if they're going to come to a professional like me or someone else, I think they're at first afraid they're even going to be judged. They don't make enough. They make too much. They don't know how to keep their books, things are a mess or, whatever that might be. They're embarrassed maybe of that. They don't know, they don't understand some of the numbers. And it's okay, right? I'm good at what I do, and other people, like, I'm not great so much at, internet technology. So I have an IT professional, to help me. So we all have our strengths. So I would say, don't be afraid to go and get the help, and you're not judged, like the doctors say, I see all the time. It doesn't matter, that's the same thing for us, right? Like, we're here to help and to give the information. So I think that's why sometimes people don't reach out just for professional help. But I think just overall, the concept of bookkeeping or accounting will scare people too, because if I don't do it right, I'm not going to file things correctly, and the IRS is going to penalize me, or their state's going to penalize me, or there's so much to know. Like if you're running payroll, the
Yeah.
taxes and all the things you have to do for that. So I think it can be overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
And just the thought of numbers, especially if someone feels that they're creative and they're not good at the logical side of things. A lot of people look at that and say, well, I'm not good at that. And so it's easier to bury your head sometimes in the sand than to really look at the numbers.
When should someone actually reach out to a bookkeeper?
I would say, even if someone is just starting out and they don't have a budget for a bookkeeper, it's not a bad idea to at least have a consultation and learn like, what is the proper way to account for things? And even if you're not going to use software, like I've told people who are just starting out that don't really have a lot of cash available, Excel is fine, right?
Yeah.
You can still track your expenses by category. You'd be able to give that to your CPA by saying, this is how much I've paid, you know, for office supplies or tools and equipment or whatever those categories might be. It's okay. It's not ideal, but that's a great way to start. But if you don't even know the proper way to even like track expenses or your income or sales tax, and that's getting more complicated too, sales tax, if you're selling out of your own state, but really just get some training and be willing to invest at least that much in the training, because it's so much better to learn at the very beginning how to do it correctly. And then, you know, continue on that way. And then when you're able to hire someone, great.
Yeah.
But if you don't do it correctly, so many people come to us after they've been kind of doing it themselves for a while. And it's much more difficult to clean up than it is to do it correctly.
That's true. I can see that. What would be like a difference, if you can explain, between a CPA and then having a bookkeeper, so people can understand the difference of that?
Sure. And some CPA offices have bookkeepers on staff, but generally CPAs don't do bookkeeping. They're doing the actual tax preparation. They do tax planning, right? So they'll use financial information from what you've done already so far. They also might be looking, you know, with you into the future. What do you think is going to happen the next year, 3 years, 5 years? Like, help you plan. When should you be purchasing equipment, or do you need to defer income into next year, or do you need to accelerate, you know, some of those things? So they do a lot more of that type of work, where a bookkeeper, we start with the data that needs to be entered. So we're taking bank statements, credit card statements, loans, you know, all of that information, taking everything that has happened in the business and posting it into a software system, giving you financial reports. So you're looking at your income statement so you can see how much revenue came in, what did you spend, are you profitable, not profitable, a balance sheet, which tells you what do you own, right? The values of your bank accounts, any other assets you might have, if you have equipment, what do you owe, right? So whether that's credit card liabilities, payroll liabilities, and what equity do you have in the business, which is like your ownership. And there's other reports, you know, that we can also give, general ledger, or depending on, sometimes people need to know like profit by customer, or maybe they're tracking different divisions of their company. So we can give all of that information. And that's what we do. And then I also have been doing a little bit more, I'm calling it like advisory services, really trying to educate them and dig deeper into their company. Because if we're only getting information after it happens, especially if someone comes to us a year later, this happens a lot, where someone just brings a year's worth of bookkeeping. There's not much you can do to fix it. Done, right? You can fix it for the future. But if we would have seen something every month, we might have been able to help you catch, like, are you aware that you are spending like this much in this category, which is a little higher, you know, or maybe a lot higher than typical, and we can help you find the problem. So ideally, we're able to work with you more on like a partnership level, even, and coming in and helping you identify, like, what are the goals you have for your company? What is it going to take for you to meet those goals financially and other things? You know, there's probably things in your systems that you need to have. So that is something we can also help with. So it's not just the bookkeeping or the payroll processing. It's really more high level advisory services that we can also offer.
Wow. Okay. So lot, right? I'm listening to all of that. Well, it is. And I think that is kind of, it's like, that's where people feel like, oh my gosh, there's so much I need to know. So what would you share to someone, whether they are just starting new, or maybe they're like, I got a mess over here. Because you mentioned a couple of times different softwares. So would you recommend like a QuickBooks or Quicken or what have you? Like, what is something like a good starting software for someone?
Right. And actually, this is interesting. This is a topic I shared because there's so many people starting businesses right now that I've actually, I had a boot camp, and I'm actually going to be having very soon another one where we're explaining a lot of this information to new business owners. If they've just launched or they've launched in the last year, we're really going to help educate on a lot of different topics. And this is one of the ones that I talked about is software. And like I said a few minutes ago, it might be as basic as a simple ledger, or Excel sheet to start. There is a software out there that's called Wave Accounting that I have recommended before too. That is for the very basic, if you don't have other needs, is actually no cost. And you can use that then to also post your transactions and do some invoicing. It's not, again, high level, but for those who are just basic starting out and probably don't have a lot of needs for their company with different types of reporting, it probably would work. There is QuickBooks Online. There's still QuickBooks Desktop, although Intuit is trying to get everyone to the cloud. There's another software called Xero that's also online competitor to QuickBooks Online. But the downside of those is they're quite expensive for someone, especially starting out when you're looking at the monthly cost. So we just really have to figure out for them what's the best solution.
That's a good, I like that advice, because I think that's one of the first paralyzing points, if you will, where do I begin and what kind of software and what should I be looking at? What are some of the mistakes that you see people are making when it comes to their financial reports, or even coming into this particular space outside of not, moving forward? But what are some mistakes you see?
Sure. Well, the first mistake, like I said earlier too, is if you're waiting for a year until your taxes are due to even look at bookkeeping, right? Because again, you're not even looking at what's happening in your business, and you don't really know if you're profitable or not. Just looking at a bank balance doesn't tell you if you're profitable or not. Cash flow is different than profit. And that's one of the mistakes people make as well, is they'll say, well, how can I even owe tax? How can I be profitable? Because I have no money, right? But if you're living off of the money you're earning and you are taking that out as a draw, the IRS still sees that as profit, and it's going to be taxable. So that's one of the things too, is really not looking at cash flow, not understanding the difference and if you're profitable, and waiting to the last minute to even get your work done. And like I said, you can't make those changes. Another thing that is not being done correctly is filing documentation on time, whichever documents that is, whether it's payroll reports, sales tax reports, business licenses. There is a lot of things that go into kind of the compliance side of things if you don't know what you're supposed to be filing. Another thing that people don't necessarily realize is that if you are not operating the business under your own legal name, so if you're I'm Joe's Landscaping Company, your name is not Joe's Landscaping Company.
Right.
According to the IRS, you need to have a DBA, which is a fictitious business name, or doing business as, and that's how you're identified as, a business. And so you need to file for that DBA as well. And another thing I mentioned kind of briefly earlier, sales tax can be an issue. It's becoming more complicated because states are saying now, even if you're not located in our state, if you have a certain number of transactions being sold into our state, you now need to collect and remit, where before you didn't, you would just be like, oh, I'm selling out of state, I don't have to. So that's becoming more complicated. So you have to understand if those laws apply to you, and figuring out how to collect and remit that tax. And I think one other big issue that people don't necessarily understand, or maybe aren't even aware of, is if you are paying somebody who is not on payroll by check or ACH or, a cash, Venmo, anything like that, technically, you should be reporting them as an independent contractor on a 1099. Now, the rules, I'm going to say, are very general. There's some things that are different, but in general, if you've paid someone more than $600 and they are not reported by a third-party processor. So if you use a credit card, the third-party processor reports that on a 1099K. Up until this year, Venmo did not. The law is now changing. They're going to also be required to. But if you had paid anyone by cash, check, ACH, and it was 600 or more, you are supposed to report them as an independent contractor. And how much did you compensate them? And you're supposed to report that to the IRS. And it became a little more complicated last year because now there are 2 forms, not one.
Oh,
There was an
wow.
MISC form. Now there's an NEC. NEC stands for non-employee compensation. So if you're paying someone as a consultant, or if your CPA is not incorporated, or, you know, there's professionals that you're paying, they are now on that NEC. And then if you're paying rents or, you know, other types of compensation, that's now on the other form. But failing to do that could result in penalties for you as well.
Wow. It's a lot. So, okay. So let me ask you this, because, you know, obviously you're knowledgeable in this because this is your area of expertise, but someone who's not knowledgeable in this and not in this area, how would they know, or how could they be educated on all the changing laws and all the different things you mentioned, like with the sales tax? Because truth be told, most people, if they're not operating that space, won't think to look up that information.
Right.
So how would they be aware of that?
Well, I think, again, one of the things that my passion is really to help educate people. And there are other people like me who we really want to educate you and give you all the information you need. I have started, and it's actually just going to be started really in the next couple of weeks, with a business attorney. Again, it's going to be like a membership group, even that it's very limited cost, but we're going to answer questions, legal questions, like what kind of legal questions can you get answered for less than many hundreds of dollars a month, right? I mean, an hour. Like if you were to go to an attorney, it's like $300, $400, $500 an hour or something. But it's really things like, if you have a question, you're going to be able to post that question. We're going to have office hours. We're going to share information that we know is helpful for new businesses. And there's other people out there doing the same thing. So you could probably search the topic on YouTube. You could look for Facebook groups or LinkedIn groups that are in your industry, even, because there are different industries that have different requirements. But finding those resources, online, you know, resources, whether it's, I want to learn from the IRS what I need to do. The IRS does have lots of resources as well. Like, you know, if you're a non-profit company, what do you need to do? If you're hiring someone, what do you need to do? I mean, they do have a lot of resources too. So I would say even finding like a Google search that gives you resources. But again, there's a lot of us professionals out there that are trying to educate people and give them those tips. So again, if someone's interested, like I said, especially for those, if they've only launched in the last, you know, year or less, we're really going to be focused on them too, to really help them understand what they need. And that we're calling it Smart Start for Your Biz.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
We can really help, you know, educate that, but really, or find a mentor, you know, who do you know that is also an entrepreneur that can help? Because I know when I started, like I said, I didn't even intend to start a business. I didn't know entrepreneurs. I didn't know like what I didn't know in the first place. And some of the things that I knew that I didn't know necessarily how to find the answers either. Like, well, how do I figure out the right pricing for things? Or, you know, when do I need to hire my first employee? Or what does that require, you know, when you hire? There's just so much to know. And the reason I even am starting that membership is my daughter and her husband started a business last year. And so she kept calling me with questions. And then she said, Mom, like, we need a resource out there that can answer these questions in one place, because again, we don't even know what we don't know. And we don't know what to search for. And she's like, I don't know what I would have done if I didn't have you. And so that's, again, if you miss something that you should have done with your federal or local state governments, they're not going to care that you didn't know. They're going to say, you should have known, sorry, here's the penalty. Right. And that breaks my heart when somebody comes to us as a new client and says, I didn't know, here's the notice I got. Can you please help?
I love that. You know, one thing I appreciate that you didn't say, because I think there's some things that you shouldn't just go online and Google. I think when it comes to your financial stuff and stuff that can affect your livelihood and your family and tax and all these different things, you should go to a professional, and you should go and get that information. Not saying there's nothing wrong out there online, so let me say that. But I do think there's some things that when it becomes deals with your day-to-day, how you pay your bills, how you survive, I think having a professional like yourself and being connected to the things that, you know, that professionals like you do is, I think, a very wise decision. It's one of those non-negotiables, I think, honestly, because I know sometimes people feel like it's too expensive to kind of reach out. And I've heard that before too, but you have to look at the expense of not reaching out. the expense of
Right.
not getting that actual knowledge from someone that specializes in this area. Some things to me
Right.
are definitely worth that investment.
For sure. And if you realize that a penalty, like if you didn't pay your tax on time, if you didn't do a filing on time, it's usually a minimum 10% penalty plus interest. And depending on what that tax is, of course, is going to affect that penalty and interest. But if you even look at how much do you earn in an hour, you know, like if you were out there selling or bringing a new client or providing that service, what could you bring in that hour, and how long would it take you to do the thing that you're not as good at? Right. So it might take you 5 hours to figure out all of these different things. And you could be making 5 hours of your, you know, compensation, or if you're networking and building, you know, relationships that are going to bring in revenue in the long run. So I think it's really looking at the big picture, not just the dollar sign, because sometimes that could be scary. And people are like, oh, if I have to pay a professional to help and I have to pay them $500 to sit down with me and go over all of this information, and that's just a number I'm throwing out there. You know, I don't know what the situation is for that person, but a $500 investment might seem scary to someone. But if you really go in and learn everything you need to do and you avoid those penalties, you're going to save more than $500.
Exactly. I love that. When should someone in business put themselves on payroll versus like paying themselves out of the business directly? That's a big question.
This is something that is confusing to a lot of people too, because they're like, well, I'll just take money out of the business, you know, and in some cases you have to do it that way. And some cases you're supposed to be on payroll. So the first thing that we really have to understand is, what entity are you? So if you are operating as a sole proprietor, or you're operating as a partnership with someone, technically you cannot be on payroll. The IRS actually does not allow it. And then the states follow like federal guidelines in that area in most cases. There are a few cases where you do have to be an employee, even if the federal government says that you're not, but usually that doesn't apply to owners. But in that case, you're taking out distributions or what we call draws really from the business. And you are then paying your tax as the individual on your individual tax return. As a S Corp or a C Corp, or potentially an LLC, depending on how they filed, if an LLC also is filing under an S Corp or C Corp, you're supposed to pay yourself reasonable compensation, which this is where a lot of people don't do that either, because they think, well, I'm just taking draws out. I'm the owner. I don't have to. But the IRS wants you to be on payroll and paying into your Social Security and Medicare and other things. And technically, you still are doing that if you're filing on your individual return. But they want to see you on payroll. They want to see reasonable compensation. And so that's what you're supposed to do. So it doesn't mean you have to pay everything you pay yourself through payroll, but it does mean that what would you pay somebody to do your job if you weren't doing it? And that's considered the reasonable compensation. So doing that. And so it doesn't mean the minute you start your business, you have to be on payroll either, even if you start as an S corporation. But once you really are showing a reasonable amount of profit too, where you are going to be taxed to, you really should be on and having some salaries in there.
So now that you've answered this part here, because I want to ask more, so is this going to be part of your program where you'll be able to break down a little bit more about what entities should someone sign up for? You even mentioned about like Social Security, and I know for a fact, many people, when they are, whether the LLC or S Corp or what have you, they don't think of in those medical terms at all. Like not medical terms, but they don't think Social Security, they don't think about any of those different kind of things. And so these are kind of things you're going to cover in the program that you're creating? Okay.
Yes. So again, we'd already done once before kind of a boot camp where we talked legal issues, financial issues and things too. And again, this is something that will be in the membership group ongoing as well. We'll have specific topics we're going to cover, as well as allowing those questions. But this is a big area that people are like, well, what are the pros and cons of being a sole proprietor versus an S corporation versus an LLC? I'm not sure what I should be doing. We'll give you, these are the pros, these are the cons, understanding that some of these entities, you have minimum tax payments. So even if you are not profitable or you don't owe as much tax as that minimum is, you still have to pay that minimum. So some people might see that as a downside. And if they're looking at saving cash, they might not want to do that. But if you want the protection, of having an entity, then you might see like, yes, maybe I don't owe a minimum $800 in tax yet, but I have the protection. So it's really giving those reasons of why you might want to have it on this side or that side, and really understanding the whole concept together, not just like one aspect of it.
Right. That makes a good point. So one other question is, I know tax payments is a big thing as well. When should people pay them, or share a little bit more about what that looks like from a business owner perspective?
Sure. So if you are on payroll as an employee working for a company, we all know that your check, they take out taxes depending on how you're claiming for, your dependents and everything too, but you're paying it basically throughout the year. As business owners, we are supposed to be paying our tax throughout the year as well. You're not supposed to wait for the whole year and then you file your return and then they say, here's how much you owe, and then you pay. Yeah. You are supposed to be making estimated tax payments. And even if you're on payroll and you're having some payments, for your taxes each time you're paid, you might still need to have estimated tax payments depending on, all of your whole picture, which is again, a reason to talk to your CPA.
Yes.
So they can really look at everything. But if you're supposed to be making estimated tax payments, they are due 4 times a year. And I always say you can't even just say quarterly, because they don't follow an every 3-month due date. It's strange. Again, I don't understand why this does, the way they do things. But one is due in January for the prior year. So your final tax payment is due in January. Then you have a tax payment due in April, June, and September. And so your CPA can help you figure out what are those amounts that you need to be paying each time. You can send it in with a check and a voucher. Most of the time now, I just tell people just enroll in the electronic filing. You'll have that guarantee. You'll see it says confirmation number. The IRS is so far behind in documents. You don't know exactly when that's even going to be processed. You have to keep in mind, like, I wrote a check for an estimated tax payment, and make sure that you keep that amount in the bank, right? So it's just easier to do it electronically, but making sure that those are done, because if you don't file those on time, again, you can end up with penalties.
Oh my gosh, so much to learn. No, but this has all been really good information. And I think this is like one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on here, because some of the things that you're sharing, not some things, all the things you're sharing actually are the questions that I know that I hear often, or people are always asking about. So let me know, what are some ways that they can contact you? I mean, obviously I see your information there, but I would love for you to have any closing thoughts, but also share how they can get in contact with you, because I do think it's definitely you're a very necessary resource to have on anyone's business team.
Sure. I think for one closing thought, one thing that I didn't mention that I would love to share right now too, because there are many business owners that may qualify for the employee retention tax credit still, and a lot of people have not filed. There's a misunderstanding too, that if you had a Paycheck Protection Program loan, you can't have this employee retention tax credit, and that changed, and you can, so you might qualify. So if you're, unsure and you want to have some information on that, I do have videos too that actually explain on YouTube how to actually claim these credits for 2020, 2021. But basically, if you had a mandatory reduction of services or shutdown, or you had a specific number and it changed from 2020 to 2021, but if your income was reduced by a certain percentage, you can qualify for credits. And again, we can help you with that. So I wanted to throw that out there, because there's a lot of people that don't know, and it could help you get some cash in your business if you had employees, not just the owner. There's some things we can give. Again, on my YouTube channel, you can just search Candy Messer, or you could search the hashtag BizHelp for you. You can find my videos, or people can reach out. Again, on the back, I have my email address. We have contact@abmp.com, or our website, abmp.com. I have a lot of resources, a blog, I have video blogs, a podcast, and you were a guest a couple times on my podcast as well. So again, just really my goal is to educate and help entrepreneurs be successful. And that's why I have all these resources. So find me Facebook, LinkedIn, on YouTube. You can find me all over. Search Google, and I'm sure I'll pop up.
I appreciate that. And I definitely want to encourage people to reach out to you, because I think one of the things that we're striving to do here behind her brand is to provide resources, and more importantly, real ways for you to help build your businesses. And I think financially is one of the biggest cornerstones of any business, and having it set up properly will definitely reduce years of headache. And
Right.
honestly, and on the other side of that, truthfully, it'll help you be more profitable when you really understand your
Right.
numbers. And I would encourage anyone, if you're afraid of your numbers, and I will admit, I used to be, I kept saying, I'm not a math girl, I'm not a math girl. And it took my accountant to say, it's not about math. It's not about that. You're thinking school. This is when I
Right.
first started my business. She was like, no, this is about how to make you more profitable. You'll make smarter decisions. You'll evaluate what really and truly you should be investing in your business and what you need to scale back from. And I can tell you from experience, having that knowledge has made me much more savvier as a business owner. I'm much more savvy about where I spend my resources. And now I love looking at my numbers, probably too much because I'm that person. I want to wake up every morning and scan everything, but that's just me now. But it's funny how I went from this area to now, like really loving to look at everything so I can make sure that I'm responsible. This is not just personally, but I also have a team, and I want to make sure
Right.
that, their families are depending on, the income they're getting from us. So I want to make sure that fiscally we're good. So I would encourage
Right.
anyone to really look into this. So I appreciate your time greatly.
Well, thank you for letting me share. I really appreciate
No,
being here today.
no problem. Well, guys, I'm gonna post all her information on her on the page on the YouTube. And so all the YouTube channel she mentioned, the blog and all that, we'll make sure we get links from you so we can put that all up there. And I encourage you definitely to reach out to her. So thank you so much for being a part, Candy, of our Let's Talk About It. And we will see you guys next time.